to the shop, everybody. Today I want to go over a topic that I get a lot of questions about. They all kind of boil down to the same thing, and that's how do you work in a garage shop? Like, what are the concerns that you might have, and what things can make the environment better? And specifically, I get a lot of questions personally about how do I maintain a woodworking and a metalworking shop in the same space, because there are some things that you need to consider while doing so. One of the most important things I think is actually sitting over here to my left, so let me reposition the camera and we'll get started. Good tools can be very expensive, but they can last a lifetime. For example, I've personally owned a hand plane that at the time I owned it was over 100 years old, and it worked just as good as a brand new one. And if you've spent, like I have, over a decade at this point acquiring tools, you want to protect that substantial investment. And that's why, to me, this dehumidifier is the most important tool in the shop. Because here in the Midwest, for example, we have extreme shifts in temperature and in humidity. And that's a problem if, for example, you've had a cold streak, so all your tools in your shop are cool, they're thoroughly saturated, so they're just cold. If you open your garage door or your shop door or the windows to your shop, and all of a sudden you get an inrush of hot, humid air, what's going to happen is the moisture in the air will condense on your tool surfaces, usually the cast iron, just like dew on grass. And that's going to rust them, and it's going to ruin your day. Trust me, I have personally experienced this coming out into a shop and seeing all of my cast iron surfaces having light surface rust on them. So for like $200, you can get a one like this. This is a 70 pint unit. It's got automatic sensors. It'll shut itself off if it gets too cold. So this thing stays plugged in and runs 24/7, 365, except for when I'm filming. And in general, I think my opinion is that protecting your tools is probably the most important thing you can do. So let me reposition this camera and I'll show you the way I protect my metalworking tools from my woodworking tools. And that'll make more sense in a minute. If you are doing woodworking and metalworking in the same shop, something I highly recommend you do is you protect your metalworking equipment, like your lathe, your mill. If you have a surface grinder or a shaper, anything that's got lubricated, oiled surfaces on it, you need to keep them covered when they're not being used so that you can keep sawdust off of them. Because I, again, can tell you from personal experience, if you get sawdust on a machine that's got a good amount of whey oil on it, it makes a mess, and you're going to end up disassembling the machine and cleaning it. Thankfully, protecting them is fairly simple. You just cover them with something that will keep the dust out. In this case, my lathe is covered with a box-shaped cover that I made like 12 or 13 years ago when I bought the machine. I don't know, I think it was maybe $60 for the material because it was really high in canvas, and the only place I could find it at the time was at a local craft store or something like that. And then my mill, this is just a $25 heavy-duty painter's tarp from Harbor Freight. I've never had any problems. They keep the dust out. They keep the machines clean, when not in use, of course. And to me, the couple of dollars I spent, it's well worth it not to have to spend an afternoon of my shop time cleaning the machine instead of using it. It doesn't matter if you have a big shop or a small one, if you've been collecting tools for a few months or a few decades, whether you're doing woodworking or you're doing metalworking, or if maybe you're painting or something in your shop. Organization is something that I think you should spend a good deal of time thinking about, but the reason you should be thinking about it vary depending on your specific circumstances. If you have a small shop, or if you've reached the capacity of your current shop, then you need to think about organization so you can get as much stuff into your shop as possible. It's probably the simplest way of putting it. And one of the things I've seen that I think a lot of people don't utilize enough organization-wise is wall space. I've been to several shops where the walls are bare. Everything's in a tool chest or sitting out on the workbench. There's always that attitude about woodworking and metalworking. There's no such thing as a good horizontal surface because it gathers tools on it. And actually, in my opinion, it should be the wall that gathers the tools. So I'll give you an example. Is my wall right here. I have stuff from ceiling to the floor. I've got clamps up here, and the reason why they're as high as they are is because they don't need to be down here at face level. because I can grab the bottom of it. Same thing with my giant crosscut sled here. I mean, I could sit it somewhere, I could hang it, I could put it someplace else. Like I've seen people just have them standing against the side of the machine even. But over here, it's out of the way. It's the same thing over here. At one point in time, when I only had a couple turning tools, they were just sitting on the shelf. But as I've acquired more, and more tools in general, I've got to find a place to stick this stuff. So I would say my one big tip is if you reach the capacity of your shop, think about how you can better utilize your walls. The other big thing to think about when it comes to organization is efficiency. I don't see this a whole lot in metal shops, probably because I haven't been in as many metalworking shops as I have woodworking shops. But a good example is one I've seen a lot is related to the clamp wall, for example. You want it to be as close to where you're doing your clamping as possible. And for me, that's on top of my router table. I do probably 95% of my glue ups at the router table. But I've been in shops where the clamp wall is on the other side of the shop. So you either walk across it and then come all the way back. And that's just an inefficiency. It's a problem when you're doing a glue up, because you have a limited time to get the glue up done before the glue sets up. And it's like I'm a hobbyist, so to me, like, wasted time is time I'm not getting to do what I want to do. So think about how best you might organize your shop. I don't know if you necessarily need to get as OCD as me. Like I have a CAD model of my shop because when I've got so much stuff shoved in here. It shows where the plugs are, where the access hole is to the attic, all so I can space stuff to utilize the space as best as possible. I don't think everybody needs to do that, but you might need to. So the next thing I think I should cover is safety. So let me reorganize the camera and we'll talk about safety a little bit. Just to clarify, I'm not going to go into any of the personal safety stuff, like what type of glasses you should wear, or what type of footwear you should have on, or whether you can or cannot wear shin gloves in the shop. Those always seem to be controversial topics, and I'm just going to avoid them. All I'm going to say is use common sense. I'm going to touch on two things that I think you should have for general shop safety, and for yourself and for your shop, or anyone that might be in it for that matter. First one being, keep your shop clean, or at least as best you can. For example, the floor in a concrete garage is usually pretty slick, especially when you get something like fine sawdust on it. I've slipped and almost fell a couple times, and I've watched my father fall a couple times and completely bust his butt when I was a kid. So, while it doesn't seem like that obvious, it is something that can hurt you, especially when you consider all of the tools you have around to have nice sharp corners. So, you can whack your head on something and maybe have to make a trip to the ER. The next one is one that I think should be obvious, but I've been to a bunch of shops and they don't have one. Get yourself a fire extinguisher and think about potentially setting stuff on fire and how that might happen in your shop. For example, my welder. That's pretty much the only source of fire. No, I shouldn't say that. The welder, and then hot chips off of the lathe or the mill could start a fire. For example, if I've just done a bunch of woodworking, especially with hand tools, I'm going to have some of those on the floor. These might as well be soaked in gasoline, because if anything hits these are going to start burning. Again, if you're doing woodworking, you've probably got a bunch of solvents, mineral spirits, lacquer thinner, naphtha, whatever. It's a garage. You've probably got a container of gasoline for your lawnmower, your weed whacker, whatever. So keep that in mind. That kind of comes back to organization. Think about where you're going to do your welding or your metalworking, where you're going to make hot things that might cause a fire, and put the stuff that could burn as far away from it as possible. Like, for example, mill and lathe are over there. All the oils and whatnot for them are way up above them, and then off the side and kind of hidden. And then all of my chemicals for woodworking are either, like the temperature sensitive ones are in the house, in the utility room, and all the ones like gasoline and stuff like that are over here, off the floor, as far away from the stuff that could make them catch on fire as possible. And then put this someplace where you know it's going to be. Like, for example, I have it over here, right by the garage door, and then I check it every now and then when I walk by, just look at the gauge and make sure it's actually got, can't remember what it's called, whatever the fluid is that's inside of it, or the gas, technically I think it's a gas, you use to put fires out and make sure it's actually got some of it in it. So, I guess I should say that's really all I got. Hopefully I covered all the questions people have emailed me about, or left messages in YouTube for, or sent, contacted me through my blog. If I haven't, let me know and I'll try and address any questions you guys have.